Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday because it's all about the food. Even while living abroad, I've kept the tradition of making a Thanksgiving dinner every November. But it comes with some challenges. For one, I can't get turkey, and I don't have an oven. So here's how I make Thanksgiving dinner without an oven. One of the keys of making a big meal in a small space is preparing what you can in advance and reheating it later. Mashed potatoes are perfect for this because they store and reheat really nicely. In Japan, I make mashed potatoes with satsumaimo, Japanese sweet potatoes. I recently made a video on 3 ways to prepare them. Check that video out later in the description below. Okay, let's get started.
Let's give that a rinse, cut off the ends, and peel. Cube it up into large even chunks, and toss it into a small pot. Briefly rinse and discard the starchy water. Cover with some fresh water, put it on the stove, and bring it to a simmer. Don't forget to add a pinch of salt. We'll boil for about 15 minutes. Let's test with a fork to see if they are ready. If it still hangs on like this, they need more time. After a few minutes, check again. If they slide off the fork without any resistance, they're good. Drain the sweet potatoes, place the strainer over the pot. With a rolling pin or a wooden spoon, press the sweet potatoes through. This process makes the fluffiest, creamiest mashed potatoes ever. No lumps, no gumminess, perfect mash without needing too much butter or cream. Make sure to use a spoon to scrape off what is still clinging to the strainer, which is actually most of it. Add a couple of pats of butter and about a 1/4 cup of milk. Give it a stir so it just comes together. We want it nice and smooth. Next, this is optional, but a small dab of whole seed mustard. My British friend showed me how to make it this way my first Thanksgiving here, and I've made it this way ever since. Don't forget to taste, season with salt and pepper accordingly. And there we have our first dish ready, some mashed sweet potatoes with mustard. Let's set that in a container for now to make room in our pot. Next, stuffing. Stuffing is kind of a hard concept to explain in Japan. You definitely can't buy it at any foreign food markets. So I came up with a method to make my own with a Japanese ingredient. But first, let's dice some celery. One important step that is often overlooked is peeling the fibers from the celery. It makes it so much more pleasant to eat, especially in soups, which this isn't, but anyway. Also, don't throw away the leaves, they work really great as an herb on top of soups or salads. With celery tips out of the way, let's dice the smaller stalks, cut the larger stalks lengthwise into strips, and dice those too. Run your knife through the pile of celery for a fine dice. Set those aside for later. Before our cutting board gets oniony with alliums, let's dice an apple. I like it for the sweetness and texture it brings to the stuffing. We'll only use half, the other half will be a snack for the cook. See, that's why we don't want the board oniony. Core it, peel, slice, and dice, and set those aside. Now let's dice an onion. I'll probably use half for the stuffing and half for other things. Same with the garlic. I'm cutting about 4 cloves, which I'll use for the greens and mushrooms later. Make sure they are finely diced. With the vegetables cut and out of the way, I can make way for the meat. I'm using a sausage, which I'll dice. I will brown this first to give the stuffing a nice base flavor. I've also used block bacon in the past. Set that on a plate and we are ready to get the stuffing going. Get out a small pot, fill with water, about 1.5 liters, and drop in some bouillon cubes. We'll be using this for more than just the stuffing, so it's good to have a pot of stock on ready to go. Of course, use fresh stock if available. Other than dashi, it's not too common to make stock in Japan. I think it's an issue of space, so stock cubes are fairly common. While that dissolves, let's saute the sausage in a little olive oil. Once that gets some nice color on it, push to one side. Add in the onions and celery. Season with a little salt. Make sure to sweat and not brown. After a couple minutes, add in the garlic. I like to let it hang out on the onions for a minute before mixing it in so it doesn't burn too quickly. Once the onions start to become translucent, stir everything together. Add in the apples, and since I can't get cranberry sauce in Japan, I usually add dried cranberries at this stage, but I couldn't get them at my local supermarket, so I opted for raisins instead. I like the dried cranberries for tartness, but the raisins are nice too. Add a pat of butter, and a sprinkle of nutmeg to make it smell like the holidays. Stir together and let that cook so the apples soften and the raisins rehydrate. At this point, add in a few ladlefuls of stock to just cover everything. Let that simmer for a minute or so. Okay, so what's the Japanese ingredient that will turn this sausage and raisin soup into stuffing? Panko. Pour in a cup or so and mix together. If it looks too dry, add a little more stock and stir together until you get the right consistency of stuffing. Kinda like this. Set that in its own bowl and cover with foil for later. Next, it's nice to have some greens, so I'll saute some shungiku, chrysanthemum greens, and a little garlic and red chili. At home it's broccoli rabe, but I can't get it here. On to the next recipe. Next, a family tradition that I couldn't go without at Thanksgiving, some stuffed mushrooms. Typically at home they are baked, but I use a frying pan method that I think works just as well. Let's take a pack of button mushrooms, give them a rinse, dry with a paper towel, and get rid of any excess dirt. Grab a bowl, remove the stems from the caps. Let's keep the stems in a bowl for now. If any cap breaks when removing the stem, just toss it with the stems so it becomes part of the filling. There we have our stems, which will be the basis of our filling. The caps we will just poke with a fork on each side. There are the caps, let's set those aside and prepare the rest of the filling. First, finely dice the stems and toss it back in the bowl. Dice some parsley and add some of the chopped garlic from earlier. Not too much, we don't want it too garlicky. Grate some cheese, I'm using Pecorino Romano for some nuttiness. Then some Panko, and to bind it we'll use a couple of eggs. Give it a mix. If it's looking too dry, go ahead and add a splash of water. It should have enough moisture so that it clumps together. With the filling ready, grab the caps and add a spoonful of filling in each one. To make sure I have enough, I add a small amount to each and go back later to top the caps that aren't full. The mushrooms are stuffed, so let's get ready to fry them. I start with a little olive oil in a frying pan, sear the stuffing side down. Give them a flip, and to make sure they cook all the way through, I'll add a ladle of stock and quickly cover. I'll let those steam on a medium-low heat for 6 to 8 minutes. The best part of making these is we can test one to see if they're done. They're good, so let's take them out and move on to the main dish, a pan-fried chicken roulade. Turkey is not really a thing in Japan, they are not native and the ovens aren't big enough. So instead I usually make chicken, sometimes duck. To make a roulade, we will butterfly the breast flat, cover with cling film, and tenderize. Once flat, grab some stuffing from earlier and add it to the center. Be very careful when handling raw chicken to not contaminate the stuffing. Separate out what you need in another bowl. After the filling is in, roll the chicken closed. To keep them shut while pan frying, I'm going to use some butcher's twine. Halfway through cutting twine, tying the chicken, and washing my hands every 10 seconds, I realized I had food prep gloves, which is much more hygienic when handling raw chicken. Once tied neatly, discard the gloves and clean everything down. With those ready, get out a frying pan, add butter and olive oil, sear with the seam side down first. Keep rotating so it gets color on each side. Once it has some color on the outside, we need to make sure it cooks all the way through on the inside, so let's make our own oven of sorts. Remove some grease, add in a ladle of stock, and promptly cover. Let that cook for 10 to 15 minutes on a medium-low. If it's too hot, it will burn on the side touching the frying pan. Rotate every few minutes and take its temperature. This is very important. Do not leave this to chance or you may end up with a raw center. We are aiming for 75 degrees Celsius or 165 degrees Fahrenheit. If they need more time, cover them up and test again in a few minutes. I'll take the smaller one out first because it's nearly there, and let the bigger one go for a little longer. With the chicken done, put them on a clean cutting board and let rest. Once rested, we will slice into rounds. I realized later I should have used a serrated knife, so please use a serrated knife to help them keep their shape. And don't forget to remove the twine. With the chicken done, there's only one thing left to do. Let's make the glue that will hold it all together, the gravy. Unfortunately, the downside of not roasting in an oven means we have no drippings for the gravy. Making do with what we have, we will make a gravy from the remaining stock. Melt some butter and add an equal amount of flour to form a roux. To the roux, add some garlic powder and fresh cracked pepper. Slowly add the stock to the roux little by little until it thickens and the consistency is to your liking. Okay, with everything ready, let's make our Thanksgiving dinner plate. First, a little mountain of mashed sweet potatoes with a basin, medallions of the chicken roulade, stuffing, greens, stuffed mushrooms, and then a ladle of gravy in the basin of the mashed potatoes and a little over the meat. And that is looking like a hearty plate of Thanksgiving food, all without an oven.
I hope you enjoyed this look into how I celebrate Thanksgiving abroad. No matter the space or ingredients available to you, there's always a way to make it work. For more Thanksgiving related recipes, check out kabocha ravioli next, or this video on Japanese sweet potatoes. Have fun with the recipes, and have a happy Thanksgiving.